Welcome back to another episode of Chat with the Archaeologist, presented by the Mesa Prieta Petroglyph Project. I am once again your host, Chester Levosh, the Project Archaeologist. As usual, we're going to begin with a couple of announcements, and then we're going to bring on our guest. Our guest speaker today is going to be Darienne Dey, and we're really excited to have Darienne on. We're just going to talk story and explain what it means to talk story as well. But of course, first, we've got a couple of announcements to kick off with. First, thank you again to the Northern Rio Grande National Heritage Area for your support for our petroglyph recording program. And on the topic of the petroglyph recording program, I know a number of you are looking forward to training to be petroglyph recording volunteers. We are going with just a select few of the applicants based on prior experience this year, but we're going to be getting those materials out to you very soon. I've just been able to clear my plate of conference obligations, and so now I'm going to be focusing on your training. So this is going to be a hybrid course. We will have an online component, and yes, that does come with assignments that you will hand in to me, and you must do that before you graduate to your field orientation, which is the next step before we actually assign you to a crew. More about that in the emails coming to you. Again, we are also open for tours. Now, we are open to anyone from the public, but we are still only doing private tours. What does private tours mean? That means you're booking for a group of 4 or more. If only 1 or 2 people show up, you're still charged the cost of the first 4 attendees. So grab your friends, grab your family, come out to the Mesa. It's definitely worth the ticket price. I've said it before and I'll say it again. This is one of the premier petroglyph sites in all of North America. One of the largest, densest, most prolific. You will see more images here over a larger span of landscape than you can really find anywhere with this level of accessibility. The only other thing that I know of that comes close is Coso Range, which is periodically closed, and even when it's open, is difficult to access. So take advantage of this. And we really do appreciate all the interest from the folks who are coming out for tours. Your interest, of course, keeps our organization running. If you can't make it out, please also check our website for, we still have a few virtual tours online. I do intend to update those and to create a few more virtual reality tours. However, that's only a small periodic thing, but it should still give you a taste of what we have if you can't make it here in person, or if you've been here and just want a nice little reminder of what it's like. Of course, we also have merchandise, and I would like to direct you to our store on our website if you want to support us through that. Our spring appeal is going to be coming out, so take a look, watch out for that in our monthly newsletter. If you are not subscribed to our newsletter, 1, why not? 2, you can always find it on our website. The latest version of our newsletter is always on our website. Should be easy to find your newsletter on the left-hand side navigation. So if I'm going to direct at your screen right there, right about there. So check that out. Subscribe to our newsletter if you haven't already. And of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. This is the second to last episode of Chat with the Archaeologist. We've been very grateful that you all have been tuning in and engaged throughout these now 3 seasons. We do have Mesa Talks returning at the end of this month, actually. And so you'll be finding our Mesa Talks uploaded to our YouTube channel. We will be trying to stream there as well as on Facebook. No promises on that. But even if they're not live streamed on YouTube, they will be uploaded to YouTube. And so you'll be able to find all of our Mesa Talks on there as well. That's what I'm going to be focusing on the streaming side. And of course, we will still bring to you some video content, updates on what the project is doing. As always, I also upload my conference papers and presentations on there as well. So take a look out for that. whenever conferences are coming up, just afterwards they'll come up. So still subscribe to our channel. Click the notification bell. Make sure to like the videos and to comment down below in the comment section. We really like that engagement, and it helps increase our visibility and bring you more educational programming like what we're doing here and like what we will be doing with Mesa Talks. So that's about it for the introduction section, and in just a moment we'll bring our guest on. So stay tuned and let's dig in. And I am here live with Darienne Dey from the Polynesian Voyaging Society. Darienne Dey is an archaeologist, an educator, and a wayfinder. So, Darienne, welcome to the program.
Aloha, Chester. It's so good to see you again.
Likewise, likewise. We're excited to have you on the stream. So let's begin with a little bit of background. Where have you done your studies? What degree are you working towards right now? And what is a wayfinder?
I'm glad you asked. So a little bit about my background. I did my BA in archaeology at Stanford University, and I got to be a part of the Monte Paluzzo excavation project over in Sicily, and that was great. Did that for 2 summers. And then in Hawaii, I worked for private archaeology firm for a little while, but then I got into education. So I got my master's in education and teaching and got certified to teach secondary math, secondary science, so like middle high school at schools in Hawaii. And I started teaching at Hawaiian culturally focused charter schools. And then after that, currently I'm trying to finish up my PhD. I'm currently at North Central University, and I'm focusing on wayfinding education, the ancient kind. And because we have lots of resources on that now, and it's a great time to be involved in archaeology, in education, and also in traditional cultural practices like wayfinding. Yeah, and what a wayfinder is, I mean, back in the day or currently, the simplest explanation is that it's the person that's basically not sometimes driving the canoe, depending on how big the canoe is, but on Hokulea, which is one of the vessels that I sail on, or Hikianalia, these double-hulled catamaran style, but more Polynesian stylized canoes. Navigator is the one just keeping track of where we're going. And again, they are the person who function as the compass, where they are calibrated to the natural elements, and they're helping the crew safely get from one place to another. And that hasn't changed from ancient times to now. And on land, wayfinders represent, I think in some ways, like they still serve to connect people. Like for example, like when Chester and I worked together, like when you and I worked together, we, it was a way to kind of connect maybe the non-archaeology community with what we were doing in our work. And I found it's been a way, the lessons I learned on the canoe are ways that I've applied to how I interact with people on land. And it's been great being able to reunite people across different academic fields, but also different cultures. And so, yeah, we still help people get to where they need to go, and we connect them to each other on land and at sea. Sure. So here's a little canoe model. This is actually made by one of my crewmates over on Kauai in partnership with various community entities. And it's meant to be something that kids can assemble. And so it's a visual aid for them. I'm not sure if it actually floats, but basically we sail on va'a kaulua, like hokulea, va'a being canoe, and kaulua can meaning multiple things, but basically that implies the two. Ooh,
Hold up a second. I don't think the audience. I don't think the audience was able to hear me when I asked that question. So I'm just going to ask you once again, because you've got that nice visual aid, that model, just explaining what the question for the audience was. What is a canoe? And breaking down the basics, and then talking about a bit about hokulea. So sorry to derail you. That was my mistake.
No, it's complicated stuff. No, so I mean, the most basic definition of a canoe, I had to look it up. I realized it's a symmetrical, because again, I got into seafaring for the cultural elements, and then I was like, wait, I need to learn how to sail. Even though I, grown up around sailboats, I never thought that I'd want to do that. But it was through, and that goes for a lot of us. That's the mechanism, is like kind of wanting to pursue that cultural practice, be in touch with ancestors, and then you're like, oh, I need to learn how to actually make this thing go and not fall off. And so a canoe, simple definition is just that it's a type of vessel that's symmetrical. And while that's not the case purely for the kinds of va'a that we sail, in the case of this model, yes, but we sail on va'a kaulua matter. Oh,
for
sorry.
The audience, hold on a sec. Here we go. For the audience, va'a or vaka, depending on which Polynesian language you're speaking, is a sailing canoe, and specifically one that can cross the oceans. So we're looking at a model, but these canoes can hold a crew of up to how many?
Thanks. That's a really important point. Yeah. So usually we'll have a complement of about 12 people on hokulea, and then maybe 16 previously on hikianalia, but very small crew and very exposed to the elements. So yeah, apologies. So va'a, although in Hawaii we also, we paddle 6-man outrigger canoes. You see there's like a float, and so it's an asymmetrical design. Whereas the va'a that we go on deep sea, va'a kaulua, those are meant for crossing expanses of hundreds, thousands of miles. Hokulea, the original canoe, there's more than 20 now, actually went around the world and has been all of the oceans, maybe not the Arctic Ocean, but, or not yet anyway. But so she's traversed basically like every expanse of water, and has proven that that's possible. And as much as possible, the crew members have tried to practice wayfinding in these, when within safety limits. Certainly if there's a storm coming, we also have instruments on board that ensure that we will return safely and that we're not taking calculated risks. But at the same time, as much as possible, crew try to stay true to using cues from nature to direct the canoe. So the very first canoe, hokulea, was constructed in 1975. The Polynesian Voyaging Society actually assembled in 1973 and was founded by an anthropologist, Ben Finney, an artist, Herb Koinui Kane, and then a waterman, Tommy Holmes. They got together, they formed this nonprofit. They got funding to construct a canoe, which was supposed to be somewhat performance accurate, though records at the time were spotty as far as what a Hawaiian long distance seafaring canoe looked like. And so there was a lot of creativity that went into her design, and she's evolved over the years. And certainly sailing canoes since then have different designs, and that's kind of the continual experiment. Also, just how fun is this going to be too? That's the experiment as well. So that started in 1975. Her first voyage was from Hawaii to Tahiti. Here's Tahiti back here in this. I actually got this when I got to sail there. And yeah, that was 1976. And then here it is almost 50 years later, and she's still sailing. And actually, Chester, the Polynesian Voyaging Society has been trying to voyage to Tahiti the last few weeks. And so right now, the winds have been really, really strong. And certainly, again, we're very attentive to the natural elements. We're not going to force a voyage if there's storm conditions. And so right now, the canoes are waiting out kind of the weather window for disembarking or leaving from Hawaii to go down to Tahiti. At this very moment, they're just kind of waiting out at METC. And so, yeah, this is something that I got involved in about 10 years ago. And what's been really great, again, is and same with when Chester was living in Hawaii, he was involved with Arohana Va'a, the canoe family. through Hawaii Loa, another one of our vessels. And
can I jump in a second on that?
yeah, sorry.
And just absolutely amazing organization to be a part of. And one of the things that they taught us, like right at the start of taking the courses for sailing with PVS, is the difference between sailing in weather when you're caught in a storm at sea and sailing out into weather, which is basically don't. Like, it's one thing to sail through weather, but don't sail out into weather, which is just fantastic advice. And there's some history to that with PVS and why they do things so safe with that now. But the canoes, like Hokulea, is actually pretty safe, right? You're never like sailing her on one hull, right?
Oh, as a result of the canoe capsizing. And again, this is like during the very early stages of the organization and of the vessel being tested. And he was, a renowned waterman. There's several documentaries about him, but he went to go paddle to Lanai to get the rest of the crew rescued. And unfortunately, they got rescued, but he didn't get rescued. And so it was his sacrifice that we remember. We think of every time that we go out on the ocean, but we also know that in a very real sense, we are protected by him and by others, because that's a big component of what we do too. As much as there's math and science involved, there's always a spiritual component. And if you don't feel that when you're out there doing what we do, like, you're missing out a little bit. And so there's been a lot of situations since where we've been in storms, experienced conditions that aren't empirically explainable. And that's why, again, it's great to be a part of this and to have kind of a marriage of all these different, the STEM, the culture, spirituality, and seamanship. It's fun. Like, even when Hokulea was on the East Coast, the Eastern Seaboard, I didn't get to be on any of those legs of the Royal Voyage, but I heard about the interactions where it was like, communities that had a very strong maritime identity, and then there's like, this performance accurate canoe from Polynesia, and just like everybody was nerding out together. And it's just great to hear that as much as Hokulea was born out of a time in Hawaii where it was right around the time of the Hawaiian Renaissance, where a lot of things were coming back culturally, like hula and voyaging, and a lot of political statements were being made. And although Hokulea's intention was to kind of test theories of, voyaging theories that had been existing in anthropology, maybe, it ended up spurring kind of a lot of cultural renaissance and pride in being Hawaiian or being Polynesian or being indigenous. And it caused, in some ways, means for us to, or it created opportunities for us to kind of confront multiple identities, and that it wasn't this juxtaposition of, anthropologists versus people doing the studying and people being studied. It was like, we can all be a part of this. And we have a very multicultural crew pool, and even, individually, people represent multiple cultures. And so it's great that it's so inclusive now. And it's become so much more than what it was intended to be when she was first launched. And it wasn't just about, initially it was about, can we navigate without instruments? Can we sail a performance accurate replica of a canoe? Can we sail into wind? Now it's like, can we get along? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
And can kids come on board? Yes. Yeah. Like, elders, everybody. So
it's so important to get that involvement. And I always felt so welcomed by PVS. You're talking about like welcoming multiple cultures as a part of this revival. And I'd like to get a little bit more into both the experiment the experiment that was building Hokulea, and you touched on, like, there's still a little bit that folks were figuring out, and Hokulea has been reconfigured a little bit since then. So there was definitely an anthropological question being asked, and then also that cultural revival around that time too, which seems to still really be going strong today. And so also, like, Hokulea's role in that. And so to start though, to introduce the anthropological question, and correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, is that at the time there were still a number of anthropologists, archaeologists who did not believe that the initial settling of Hawaii was intentional. They believed that folks might have drifted there, and that seems to conflict with the knowledge that Native Hawaiians had at that time. The oral traditions, the mo'olelo, were still remembered, right? So can you expand more upon that part?
Sure. So like it's true, yeah. Like Andrew Sharp's work, it was just I'm not sure exactly what the general consensus was at the time. I wasn't alive, but and it's hard to know because again, like whoever publishes, right? Like that's the word kind of on the street, and so I don't know. I'm not sure that all. It's hard to know to what degree anthropologists believe that. There wasn't a lot of evidence to suggest otherwise, but I mean, even the crab claw design of our sails, which are very highly functional, and we have these, but we also have Marconi style, which is like kind of the right triangle style. Um, this is modeled after petroglyphs that were on Maui, on a Maui. Um, you can pause. Oh, you are. Oh, okay. Keep going. Okay, I'm gonna keep going. So anyway, so there were so we've been experimenting with different kinds of kind of the morphology of the canoes over time, but basically, yeah, there wasn't at the time in the 70s, although the PBS Polynesian Voyaging Society was trying to recruit a traditional wayfinder from Hawaii, nobody came forward. That's not to say that maybe there weren't that knowledge wasn't housed within certain people's families, and maybe they didn't want to share it. Because certainly, if someone puts out an ad in the newspaper, I mean, yeah, you have the choice to not stand up and share what's privy to your family. So we ended up learning. Oh, yeah. Hmm. Definitely, yeah. And so I mean, like we were
Oh,
part of.
and I was muted again.
Oh
I
no,
was
you're
just gonna
muted. Oh
say
no, so I was just.
that was
I loved it. This is great.
that
This
was my
reminds me of being on
bad.
the canoe.
I,
Oh,
for the audience, I was just saying very quickly, working with the Pueblos today, I understand that we can't always, I mean, there's certain knowledge that can't always be shared, and there are certain historical reasons why folks might feel uncomfortable sharing that with an anthropologist today, because anthropology was founded as a colonial institution. Uh, Take it over, Darienne.
thanks, Jester, for clarifying. Yeah, or repeating. So yeah, it's true. I mean, there's still a lot of trust issues, and again, it's great to be kind of on the intersection of all these different worlds and to be able to bridge those, um, create mutual understanding too, to help kind of repair and undo damage in some ways. That's what this opportunity being a part of the voyaging community has allowed, and also anthropology and education, and as a cultural practitioner too. Um, so basically, yeah, back in the 70s, like basically Hawaiians had to outsource to Micronesia and recruit Mau Pius Piailug, who has since passed, but he's, to put it in the simplest terms, he's kind of like the Yoda for us. But he had to step outside his culture. He had to break with tradition in order to train people outside of his community. And we're so grateful. And that allowed Nainoa Thompson, who's one of our patriarchs, who's one of our leaders now, who's our Luke, um, to adapt a Carolinian system of wayfinding to the geocultural needs of Hawaii, since our islands are very different, and even, yeah, sailing to Tahiti too, are very different than sailing around the Federated States of Micronesia, or even the Marshall Islands, or Guam, and that area. So because of that, we were able to have a system, and then I was able to learn that. Many others have been able to learn that, and so we had a framework to be able to apply at sea. But what's great about having so much digital information at our fingertips now, I mean, I feel so spoiled to live in this day and age. So for like my doctoral research, I can just go look up Hawaiian newspaper articles, and from the 1800s to the mid 1900s, and there's can you hear me?
To the audience, it appears that we've lost Darienne's video right now. I think she'll be back. Our internet connection here is not too great today. So, but I think we have your audio still.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, cool. All right, I'll try not to gesture too much. But so basically, um, if you we can learn Hawaiian language.
We have lost Darienne. I'm going to try to get her back right now. Just hold, please.
I'm I'm here. Oh no, standing by.
Yeah, it sounds like we've got you back. All right, folks, we're back. Um, like I said, we're having troubles with our internet connection here, and I do think that it's on our end, uh, but it's looking good right now. Your video's looking really smooth right now. Is it, I point over here. It looks like I'm pointing off camera, but it's actually where my monitor is. So. Um, I'm not quite sure where we left off and where it phased out. Um, so, gosh, we were talking about. Wayfinding. So, for those of you familiar with the stream, in season 1, I talked about archaeoastronomy, and even brought up an example here because if you've seen Moana, what do you think of how they did on Moana?
Well, Moana, so they were. If you look at the credits for Moana, you'll see that like Nainoa Thompson, our patriarch, our patriarch, some of our teachers, he's credited because they consulted with the Polynesian Voyaging Society, especially for measuring arc angles using your hand. That's something again that like is part of our pre-calibration before we go out to sea. It's not just about memorizing where stars are, but again, it's like being able to make sure that we can use only. It's not instrument navigating, but unless you count us as the actual instrument. It's using human faculties. And so like that practice of measuring the height of stars and that kind of thing, that came from Nainoa. I mean, at least that portion of that was portrayed, although that is also a maritime tradition. And certainly if you surf, you're out, you're waiting, and the sun's going down, you want to know how much time you have left. You might measure how high the sun is from the horizon so you can kind of calibrate that. For us, this is about 1 hour. Sometimes we refer to this as a kiko'o, the span. It also means hypotenuse in Hawaiian. Sorry, that was a lot. but yeah, we have different combinations of lengths within our hands. Certainly on one hand, it's easier we try to keep it to one hand so that you can compound that if you want to measure multiple hours or multiple spans. And one kind of cool thing is if for anybody who visits Hawaii in the future, the height of Polaris, or Hokupa'a, one of the words for us, that's about 1 shaka from the horizon. If you put your thumb on the horizon and then measure to the star. And that's partly how we know that we're at the latitude of Hawaii when we're sailing north from Tahiti, is that how high is the star on the horizon? Okay, it's 1 shaka. Okay, turn left, or we're there. look for birds, look for land.
And every surfer out there should know what shaka is, right?
Yeah. So yeah, that's very.
Yeah.
But
so the body as the instrument, which I think Karen Barad, a social theorist, well, a physicist turned social theorist, would agree with you that the body is a part of the instrument. But but instrument-free navigation was a part of one of these questions that folks were really in doubt about, and so the development of this, it may not look exactly like it did 1,000 years ago, but the very fact that it works and that is a part of a living culture. So like, how does that tie in with this broader cultural revival? Because you talked about dance for a moment. How would you say? And what does hokulea mean? And how does that fit into that too?
Sure, that's a lot. No, this is great. So yeah, I mean, just kind of to kind of piggyback on that idea that, like, again, humans are the instrument. Like, although we have a Hawaiian star compass, really it's the compass rose, because we are the compass, we are the needle that's like gauging where things are. And so, and then yeah, again, like although the goal is to be out there and to just use ourselves and our faculty and whatever we cognitively packed using, like, our human spatial cognition. We do a lot of extensive research beforehand, and we very much exercise the use of instruments before we go out to sea. Like, we use Stellarium, which is portable planetarium software. It's free to download to study, anticipate where stars are going to be at different latitudes. So we can have that, and we can code it and pack it so we have less of a cognitive demand when we're out there not sleeping and trying to, being very vigilant to catch all the cues from nature. And so, yeah, and like, this is an exciting time for anybody researching this, because we have so much available online in terms of either simulations of the past or, again, records from the past that actually detail this is what we did. And that's what I'm looking at in my research. And I feel very fortunate to be born in this time, that I get to experience these things. I get to learn a model. It already exists. The canoe was already built when I was born. There's a system in place that I can learn, and I can access it, and I can also study it and research. And it's just like the dream for any archaeologist, where you're like, oh, how did they know? It's like, oh, well, I can go out and actually just do this. And I hope that people getting into archaeology, or people who've been involved in archaeology, will want to, as much as possible, participate, learn the languages, especially of the cultures that they're studying, not just for the trust issues, but also just the preservation of those languages, and also to be able to access so much more of that perspective. Maybe not gain it fully ever, but at the same time, it demonstrates investment, but then also, like, yeah, you just have so much more to work with. And that's why I'm wondering, like, why certain things I found in the newspaper articles that are in Hawaiian language, why they haven't come to the surface sooner. And I'm wondering if it's just that language barrier. But anyway, sorry, what you're saying. So yeah, kind of that rolls into, like, the cultural element, and how I hope that future studies will be done, exploring human spatial cognition and our faculties for that, because certainly I was spoiled getting to teach at a Hawaiian focused charter school, where I was teaching math and science, but I also taught wayfinding and seamanship. And as a hula dancer or hula practitioner, because hula is more than what you see in Waikiki. It's ceremonial dance and chanting. It's basically a martial art. A lot of my students had that same background too, where you just intrinsically know, like, if you want to point at, say, like, zenith, they can put their hand up and they don't even have to see, like, where they're pointing, because their body, they have that coordination, having danced hula. And certainly being on the canoe, it's a really kinesthetic endeavor, and that comes into play too, but you're going beyond just, like, your five senses. And so culturally, it's cool to, it's an intellectual endeavor. It's also a very physical endeavor. And yeah, it's exciting to find out new ways that that maybe aren't in the record, about how people navigated, like, can we use whales? Can we follow what they're doing? Which we did in 2014 to go between Tonga and New Zealand. The whales were migrating to Antarctica at that time, and if we saw them and they were going parallel to the canoe, we knew we were on the right track. And so, or even being sensitive to the fog on the Big Island, because we have a volcano that's active. We can remotely sense that when people start coughing because they're allergic to the sulfur dioxide. So we're like, get closer to it, get closer to the direction that feeling sicker. Okay, we're getting close. True story.
Oh man, it's horrifying. I actually, the SAA's just reconnected with a former coworker where we were working in central Utah during some wildfires, and I'm just imagining that smell in the air.
Oh.
That was not a good day. But you were talking about spatial reckoning, and I'll bet some of our audience is curious about that sort of cross-shaped dreamcatcher-looking thing behind you. Would you mind explaining that?
Sure, it's the best of my ability. So this is from the Marshall Islands. And so again, getting up on my soapbox. So if you go and consult the Wikipedia article for Polynesian navigation, you might see something like this. And you also see the model, the Carolinian model in the sand with shells of a star compass. That is what our Hawaiian star compass is based on. They are similar in that we all belong to remote Oceania. Systems we can use these to get to each other, but they come from different places. They have different origins. And yes, they're all connected back in the day because people had to populate, hop, skip, and jump from islands. But so this is just like, oh. Okay.
Except now I've lost your video.
Oh, okay. I can keep talking though. So the stick chart that you see that you could see previously in the background, that's a model that for something that's a learning model. So that's what you would use to teach students of wayfinding about different symmetries, about wave reflection or refraction. Since in the Marshall Islands, their emphasis, their wayfinding privileges interactions with waves and swells more so than celestial cues because of the geography of their islands. And so that's a model that you wouldn't necessarily bring on the canoe. You would have that all internalized in your mind, and it's just again explaining. Oh, can you hear me? Oh, no. Let me turn off my video.
I think we should be good now. It's yeah, it's cutting in and all right. I think you're good to go.
Okay.
Sorry to our audience. The bandwidth stuff is out of our control.
This feels like we're on the canoe because again we have satellite phones. We try to connect with classrooms when we're on a voyage. We're all encouraged to adopt a school or a class at a school so that we can connect with the kids via sat phone and through video whenever possible. So we have this thing that looks like R2D2 on the back of the canoe. That's one of the things that not it's not quite ancient. People are always like, "What part of Hawaiian culture is that?" We're like, but it's so that we can connect directly to so that the voyaging experience isn't just for us. The expectation is that you do this. You're one of the few that gets to go and do this, especially if you get to like be part of the wayfinding team. It's your responsibility, your kuleana, which is in the Spider-Man sense, privilege and also responsibility to to
with
share
great
that
kuleana.
yes, with great kuleana. So it's like to share the experience with others, either directly from the canoe or create that extension once you get off. And for anybody, especially with gray hair, who was around when the canoes were first launched, for any of the kids who've never not known canoes or computers, or smartphones, right? To make sure that they are connected and that they don't get rely too heavily on devices. They rely on themselves as their own agency, their own human faculties. That's kind of a universal, regardless of what culture you come from. We all come from voyagers. We all come from ancestors who traveled somewhere so that we could be here. And so that's what I'm hoping, in the future, like if people can't otherwise get on the canoe, there's a way to connect with them. And maybe, during a future voyage, I know it'll be spotty like this probably too, but we can try to connect from the canoe so that people can see and get a taste of like the rocking. What's that like from the deck of a canoe? But I'm also hoping that more archaeologists can participate directly in the voyaging that we do.
I'm practicing. I'm practicing.
Yeah, right, with your sailboat. Yeah, exactly. You're doing your homework. Nice. but it is a possibility. It's not an exclusive community where it's like, oh, only like we're doing this. It kind of seems like a secret society sometimes, but again, I hope to connect as many people as possible. Like after this talk, I'll provide Chester with my my contact info so that people can reach out if they have more questions, refer you to websites. There's all kinds of media out there.
And we're gonna add that to the description once we're done streaming, and I'll also post that where we posted this on social media.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I mean, it's certainly, and the next major thing, I guess, just kind of like going forward, is that, like I mentioned, still trying to do these trainings back and forth between Hawaii and Tahiti. I've done that sail twice. It's really user friendly. It's over 2,000 nautical miles, but the canoe just goes. Like again, having a background in research and math and science education, it just, it defies explanation in some ways. Like the canoe just knows where to go, and it's really awesome. And so, but anyway, so like the next major voyage is going to take place. The world is a little bit safer. Oh no. Oh.
So folks, we're trying to work the connection situation, and I just told Darienne to hold on a second until we've got her back, because she was about to say something very important about the next PBS voyage, right? You want to give it a try now.
And there's, again, people can read more about this online and see the trajectory, but the plan is to go, since we went around the world from Malama Honua, that voyage, I can't remember if that's going on the shoulder.
And we lost Darienne again. I'm going to stay on the air with you, and this happened a moment ago, so we hope we get the call back here. Yeah. Oh no. And I apologize for the technical issues, folks. This is it's unfortunate that these things are out of our control. We're trying to make this work, and once we get Darienne back on the call, okay, yeah, we lost you entirely. It did that thing with both of my cameras again. So okay,
we're so far away. That's why.
Yeah. I always like to blame sunspots. I never know if it's actually the case, but it usually turns out that there's like a solar flare or some sunspots like right around that time.
Probably. No, I just gonna say the next major voyage is called Moana Nui Akea. Starts with Moana. Moana means deep sea, in contrast to Kai, which means like kind of the shallows of the ocean. Excuse me. And that's gonna start in the Pacific Northwest. The canoes are going to start out Hokulea and Hikealia. Hokulea, again, being, I never explained this too, sorry. Hokulea can mean star of gladness, or that's how it can be translated, but it's the star Arcturus. Arcturus is, in our lifetime, one of the zenith stars for Hawaii, the latitude of Hawaii. That's why it's the namesake of our first canoe. And then Hikealia, that's the name of the star Spica, which at the latitude of Hawaii, they appear to rise at the same time. And that's one of the cues. Okay, it's one of the cues that we know that we're at the latitude of Hawaii when we're sailing from someplace to Hawaii. But as I was saying, the next major voyage will take place over the span of a few years, and it will basically trace the rim of the Pacific Ocean, starting in the Pacific Northwest and traveling towards Central and South America, and then cutting over to Rapa Nui or Easter Island, going through the French Polynesian Islands and going to visit Tahiti again, and then cutting over, going down south to New Zealand or Aotearoa, and then coming up again on the western side of the Pacific, eventually going to Palau, and then to Japan, possibly to China. I'm not sure about, Russia was originally on the list, but we'll see. There's a lot of things that are tentative about this voyage again, because there's a lot of safety elements that are involved, and certainly we're sensitive to what's happening in the world and being sensitive to the communities that we visit and that we're all a part of. And so, yeah, a lot of things will have to be in place for this to happen, but that's the next major goal as far as the endeavors that's the next frontier kind of in terms of voyaging. And there's certainly other canoe families around Hawaii, not just Polynesian Voyaging Society, and there's many more canoes around the Pacific too that do similar activities going deep sea, but some are also just coastal, and those canoes take out groups of kids and they serve another function for perpetuating the education side and serving communities more directly. But yeah, as far as what the Polynesian Voyaging Society plans to do, that's the next major endeavor. And yeah, there's still, we're still recruiting for crew members for the crew pool, especially people who are from all these places. So like anybody tuning in from like the West Coast or with connections to other parts of the Pacific. Yeah, it'd be great to keep you posted when we'll be in your neighborhood, or if you want to know more or get involved somehow. There's all those ways to, yeah, be a part of this and or to learn more too.
And we'll also post links for that on the video description. We'll update with those, and again on our social media. Definitely check it out. If you're going to be anywhere near when the canoes come in, it really is quite a fanfare. I've got to see you all come in a couple of times, and it's really something that you don't want to miss if you've got the chance. And like Darienne said, that this is more than it's more than just Polynesian, because you're engaging with all of these communities as you're going along on your journey. So I figure we'll just leave maybe 10 minutes at the end for news stories. So there is a question that I wanted to get in here about, because we had mentioned briefly about some anthropological misconceptions about the settling of Hawaii, and so this ties in with this season's themes. And so Polynesian Voyaging Society directly contributed to clarifying that this was intentional, that folks weren't just clinging to driftwood. So I want to get in a little bit more about what we know now, both from the archaeological side and from the oral traditions, from the mo'olelo, about the settling of Hawaii, and what kind of questions are still out there to be asked.
Oh, there's so many questions, but yeah, we know there's several legends. Like, for example, Chester, you were involved with maintaining the canoe Hawaii Loa. The namesake of that va'a is an actual person who had a whole flotilla of va'a that came up. There's multiple stories documenting accounts of people going back and forth. It wasn't just like people came and then like stayed. And it's not just like, okay, and then another movement came. People came from Marquesas. Oh, can you hear me still?
Yeah. I wanted to interrupt you quickly, because Hawaii Loa is such a beautiful boat. Could you very briefly describe where? Because this one's all wood and lashing, but all wood and lashing. And could you describe where those hulls come from?
Oh yeah, sorry. This is so great. I need you to. You're my navigator as far as things I'm sharing. So Hawaii Loa is similar to Hokulea, but is about 20 years younger. Was constructed in the 90s, and so Hokulea was meant to. They needed a canoe. They wanted a canoe to be able to test these theories about voyaging long distance, deep sea. So Hokulea served that purpose, and she's made of a combination of natural but also artificial materials. Though she's always been lashed together, so she's held together with line, with rope, as opposed to bolts or screws or whatever. But she still had other modern materials. And so Hawaii Loa, however, the idea of constructing Hawaii Loa came from, let's see if we can have a canoe. Let's have a deep sea canoe that's made from all natural materials, from our own koa logs, the type of tree that grows in Hawaii. Unfortunately, at the time, the koa supplies had been decimated because they were, overly there was reforestation efforts in progress, but there were no koa that were big enough to, or rather, it wasn't feasible to harvest them for the sake of the canoe at the time. And so what happened was that, people had heard that, logs had drifted from the Pacific Northwest given the oceanographic currents. And so, and certainly there's a alive and well canoe culture up in the Pacific Northwest among the tribes and Salish. And so, but different kinds of canoes. But anyway, so basically what happened in the 90s was that the Polynesian Voyaging Society, our Nainoa and our leadership went and forged relationships with the Tlingit up in the Pacific Northwest and the Haida, and we were gifted 2 400-year-old Sitka spruce logs, which became the hulls of Hawaii Loa, and that forged this relationship between different, separate geographically, and maybe a little bit culturally separated indigenous peoples, but we always will have that pilina, that relationship. And we've still nurtured that. We've had crew members from Alaska come and sail. And we, again, the canoes, I'm not sure if, we're hoping Hawaii Loa too, himself will be up there too. But at least Hokulea and Hikeanlea will be starting that Moana Nui Akea voyage up in Alaska, again, to re-cement that relationship. But yeah, Hawaii Loa, the experiment of Hawaii Loa, and he did sail in the 90s deep sea, was to construct a va'a deep sea va'a that was made from wood and made from natural materials. And so that was part of the genesis of that. But yeah, every canoe has a different personality. You refer to Hawaii loa as he, as opposed to the other canoes as she, because specifically it's named after a person, a kane, a man, as far as we know. And although we don't really know his pronouns. So, but for the most part, yeah, that's the one exception I know that we refer to Hawaii loa as he versus Hokule and Hikialia and other canoes as she. So that's an important distinction. But yeah, Hawaii loa has his own personality, and Chester contributed to his maintenance.
It's been a pleasure, and I'm actually applying those lessons today. We'll talk about that off the air. So we've got just a couple minutes left, and a couple of semi-related archaeology in the news stories that I wanted to get to, and the first one is probably going to be near and dear to you and the folks around you, because there was a recent headline about the repatriation of Native Hawaiian remains. And I do want to clarify, it in both of these stories, we don't have visual aids this month because we don't show human remains on this channel. I know other channels do. That's just the way we work. We don't show human remains here. But specifically, this is a massive repatriation from, it seems like it's multiple museums in Europe. Do you want to add more to that?
I mean, I know as much as what's been out there. I haven't been directly involved, but certainly hearing about that is really reassuring. The climate of the kind of conversations that are happening now in archaeology around the world, but especially in Hawaii, are very different than when I first got involved, and certainly from when I was studied in school. And it's really encouraging. I know that like when I briefly worked at the Bishop Museum here in Hawaii, the first thing a lot of people from the Hawaiian community asked me was like, oh, or even from other Polynesian communities were like, oh, what about the iwi kupuna? Like, are you guys gonna give those back? And so I was like, oh, I'll go find out about that. Like I especially like that was part of my kuleana. I was like, I had access to people who know and have the records for these things, and it was great. We've had repatriation efforts happen here from our own museum, but it's just encouraging to hear stories like that, to hear that level of respect. That it's all about consent, kind of. And it's like it's great that like we're allowed, or Indigenous people are allowed to say, no, we want that back. We want our kupuna back, and that's being respected. Even if it's after the fact, it's just so great to hear stories like that, and it sets additional precedents for future repatriation efforts, and hopefully that'll continue. Sorry, I don't have much more info to go on. I'm out of the loop, but I know that's.
And to clarify for our audience, iwi kupuna is ancestors' bones, right?
Mm-hmm.
And and this is something that comes up a lot, not just internationally, but also within Hawaiian archaeology, especially as we see more and more development around Waikiki, Honolulu. It really seems like there's countless burials, and so burials are being identified, some burials are being disturbed, and this is a very culturally sensitive topic, for good reason. These are people, right?
And not to villainize like or purely villainize like the tourist industry. I mean, it's not all anthropogenic too. I mean, you can go to certain beaches, and again, resting iwi kupuna in sand versus other materials is sometimes more convenient, which is why, just because the ocean's eroding beach lines, that exposes iwi kupuna as well, which is again problematic because you don't know it's like hard to protect them. Then it's like nature's just going to be eroding them too, right? And so there's some things that we can control, some things we can't control, but for the things we can control, like the further development of certain places, being very sensitive to that. And again, being involved in archaeology 10, 15 years ago, and since then, it's just changed a lot in terms of expectations and how the treatment of iwi kupuna, having, I personally have disinterred multiple sets of burials, and it was a challenging experience. And so it's great that this is still something that's being discussed and that's making headlines and not purely a sensationalized way, but it's like, hey, look, these people are talking, these people are being respected. I hope those conversations continue. And yeah, so we don't know what the future holds for Waikiki, because again, Waikiki is was built. The sand is imported. Sorry, spoil things. It's the environment is not sustainable for all of the infrastructure that's there. So it's kind of, that's very telling, and that's again why iwi kupuna are becoming exposed in some ways. But I know solutions are possible, and with that continued communication and mutual respect.
Yeah. And this is a great opportunity to segue to our next story, which also deals with human remains, but over in California. And like you, Darienne, I've worked on projects with where we had to handle human remains, both in Hawaii and in California. And not things for our audience. Things don't always have to come out of the ground. And we're seeing more of that, say, in Honolulu, and certainly on some projects that I've been on in Hawaii, where there might be an effort to work around the interment, to stabilize the spot so that erosion, say, from the ocean, especially as the oceans continue to advance these days. Stabilization projects can also help preserve these burials in situ, and preserve a bit of that for sake of respect, for the sake of cultural heritage, and for the sake of possibly future scientific study, because in our second news story, we see some indigenous collaboration with the study of human remains, and a part of how this study came about is years of building up mutual respect. And this isn't to say that these partnerships exist in every situation, but it shows that if we build respect today, there might be room for collaboration in the future. In this story, a recent study of human remains from California, both through DNA analysis and through carbon-14 dating, highlighted some interesting new knowledge about indigenous Ohlone people, particularly the Muwekma Ohlone, whose traditional lands are in the Bay Area. The study also compared these remains to similar data from known human remains sets from the Great Basin, so Nevada, from the Tohono O'odham, which their traditional territory straddles the international border in Arizona and northern northern Mexico, and we've discussed them. I believe it was last year on the show, as well. Maybe it was even back in season 1, and some other populations. And so, the study showed, in brief, that some of the remains, a limited number from a larger set that was sampled, show strong genetic markers that are consistent with today's living Muwekma Ohlone, who sanctioned this study, who collaborated on this study, and who contributed to the write-up. And again, that's a part of that. There's been some trust building going on. So this confirmed that some of these remains were ancestral to the Muwekma Ohlone, and that those ancestral remains establish a slightly earlier time for them to be in the Bay Area than had previously been agreed upon. So I found this very encouraging, because this shows a collaboration, and it's not just it wasn't just an academic study. One of the major parties involved is a contract archaeology firm, or CRM firm, and so this shows cooperation even with the commercial sector, and it's a great foil to. We've talked about she who must not be named. We've talked about some problematic anthropologists in California and how they handle human remains on this show before. And so it was. I thought this was also a really good foil to that one. Darienne, if you have anything that you would like to add.
Yeah, I think again, it's encouraging to hear about that such respect is being paid. I mean, I hope that. I mean, having been on both sides of like what gets reported and what's actually being done, I hope that as much respect as what is implied is actually happening. Back. I also would love to hear again. Oh, am I back?
Yeah.
I hope that again, it's more people from the community. It's either it's not just the consent again, but participating and leading the work as well. Because again, so that it's not a question from outside, just being curious about humans from a certain community, rather people wanting to actually look at and know more about themselves and know about their ancestors. And I can't speak to like, everybody in Polynesia or in Hawaii or other places, but certainly I hope that each community is treated with given the same option and given the option to say no, or not now, not yet, and that's respected, and that, again, it's encouraging to hear that these conversations are even happening and that we get to learn about them, that they're newsworthy, certainly they can't be, it's still a question of asking individual communities, but I hope that researchers have a different kind of mindset going into it, and hopefully there'll be, again, more overlap between Indigenous communities and researchers, where there are people, contributing on both sides. And it's good. It's encouraging to hear, and I'm glad you shared that too, because again, like that's where I went to school, and we have a dorm on Stanford campus named Wakma, and it was great to see, culture's alive and well, and to hear that there's still ways that they are being treated and elevated in ways that are respectful, or increasingly respectful. But yeah, I'm glad these conversations are happening. So thanks for sharing that with this audience.
Yeah, and for anyone in the audience who might still feel frustrated about the politics around studying human remains, as this article talks about, many of the questions that are typically asked about these are about initial settlement, waves of migration. And as Polynesian Voyaging Society has demonstrated, we can address these questions without disturbing human remains. And so when these situations get politically charged, when there is any question about cooperation with or respect for Indigenous communities, we can ask different questions. We can work with these communities to get the sorts of bigger picture answers that we want without disturbing human burials. Not to say that this isn't useful evidence, but we don't have to stop the science in order to remain respectful.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
So, Darienne, thank you very much.
More experimental archaeology. Go sail, go do the things, and then find out. Learn firsthand.
Absolutely. More experimental archaeology. I love it. Darienne, thank you very much for joining us today. It's been a pleasure. Thank you again to our audience for sticking through us between me messing up my own microphone and our issues with internet connectivity. That we tried to make sure that I gave a signal to Darienne that we just lost her and wait for her to come back. So I hope nothing got too repetitive or nothing got lost. It's what live streams are. But thank you all. Thank you all for supporting this channel. Tune in next month. I'm giving the closing talk. It's going to be a good one. Mahalo, Chester. Mahalo, Yaoko. Aloha.